Hello there. Today is April 10th. This is Paul Glumaz, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Okay. Now, we've had two very significant, far-reaching developments that are going to have an incredible impact on your future, if indeed we do have a future. The first one is that Donald Trump has initiated a Moon-Mars directive. All right. And this Moon-Mars directive is a complete break with all previous space policies since they took down the space program back in the 60s and 70s. The Moon-Mars directive starts with we're going to go back to the moon and establish a manned landing on the moon by 2024, within 5 years. And then we're going to follow that up with a lunar base, which will start to be established by 2028. That's only 9 years away. Okay, a moon base. And the idea of the moon base is to begin to develop not only the resources on the moon, but lay the groundwork for a colonization of Mars from the moon. So the moon becomes the base of operations for colonizing the solar system. Now, one of the factors that is playing very important in this is that back in 2007, Indian scientists discovered water on the south pole of the moon. And then further explorations and further, I don't know exactly how this worked, but further have discovered that there's not just a little bit of water on the South Pole. There's a lot of water. And what that means is that if you set up the base where there's a lot of water, you have access to the water. You have access to oxygen. You have access to hydrogen. Of course, all this means ultimately you're going to have to go beyond solar panels and develop some kind of micro-nuclear energy capability to process all of this. Not to speak of the helium-3 that can come back to Earth and be used in future fusion. Now, the importance of this is that it sets a goal. Now, and that goal will require complete overhaul and gearing up of a machine tool capability in the most advanced stage, and materials processing and so forth. It'll jumpstart the high technology end of U.S. industry. But by itself, the U.S. doesn't really have the means. It will also require partnering with other nations in many of the facets. So it'll act as an organizing process for bringing the Russians in, if we can get rid of the Wolf Amendment, to bring the Chinese in, bring the Japanese in, bring the Europeans in, bring other people in with different components and parts. So it becomes, then you can also bring in the private sector as well. It's not anti-private, it's not public or private, but the government has to set, the nation has to set the directive. And that's why it's called, I believe it's called the Moon-Mars Directive. Now, this is long-term. It will impact those young children now, going into adolescence and slightly beyond, and begin to restore a mission, a sense of a future. Because it means you have a future. You're going to be colonizing Mars. This is I'm of the age where I won't see the colonization of Mars. I might, but I won't. But young people, this is very, very important. And it changes their whole orientation. Because the way youth operates is they have an ideal, the ideal person they want to be, the sense of the ideal, and that ideal is guiding them in whatever they do. But if that ideal is smashed or even degraded, then you get what you get. You get a mess. Because if youth don't have an ideal of what they are going to become or what they are becoming, you know, it could even be learning how to grow food from your family. I mean, and a sense of where you're going. Even becoming a teacher or any kind of profession, it's not an easy thing anymore. It never was. It takes about 10,000 hours of work to develop a skilled tradesman. And we don't even have trade schools anymore. So the ideals is very important. Of course, the negative ideals have been dominant. Lawyers, professional athletes, movie stars, speculators, hedge fund managers. These are not the most positive ideals for people, but this is going to impact tremendously in the long term. And this is actually what Kraft Erica, who developed this idea of man going into space and becoming, that this is an imperative of being a human being. That going into space is part of our humanity. It's part of our establishing our development, our growing out of the Earth and into the solar system and beyond. Is part of our nature. It's inherent in who we are, in our creative potentialities. And this is what Kraft Erica is saying. Kraft Erica was one of the German scientists that ended up working with Wernher von Braun and so forth. And he developed this whole idea of the human extraterrestrial imperative. I don't mean extraterrestrial in the sense that most people today think of, but rather human beings' extraterrestrial imperative. It's an imperative of being a human being to begin to colonize outside of the Earth. Now, this is also LaRouche's idea. LaRouche and Kraft Erica, were on the same page, and they discussed this all, and they went through it. And Kraft Erica was a friend of Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp LaRouche. And this is the policy that Trump has adopted. This is enormous. So that's number one of the developments that have occurred in the last 2 weeks, which have incredible long-term repercussions. Also, one of the repercussions is that it creates the incentive for the U.S. to work with Russia and eventually China and other nations on this. This brings nations together in a common positive future, right? This is not a policy coming from neoconservatives. This is not a policy coming from neoliberals. This is a policy that cuts across all of that. Now, the second thing that's happened is today, it's all over the news. And if you go on the internet, you can see this photograph of a black hole. And if you Google some more, you'll have a number of people trying to explain to you what this black hole is. Now, this is incredibly significant for the future. Because what it's saying is that at the center of all galaxies, there is this dense object, which is so dense that it traps light. It is so dense, but yet around it, there is a space, and around it are particles and light that are, well, there's light over here and there's particles over here, and these things are moving at almost the speeds of light around this black hole. Now, the very existence of black holes and the very existence of this sort of situation is a refutation of the typical scientific me- kinetic view of the universe. The kinetic view of the universe is that you have the universe is composed of particles. The particles bump into each other, and you ultimately have a heat death, and it's called entropy, and the second law of thermodynamics, and that's the universal law. So this completely overthrows that, because what it's saying is that the universe isn't governed by the interaction of particles or the relationship of action at a distance between masses or anything like that. That concept of gravity. No, the universe is governed by the curvature of space. Things are organized by this curvature of space, not by the actual masses themselves. The masses are involved, are responding to the curvature of space. This was Einstein's view. And Einstein developed his general theory of relativity, which predicted this sort of thing. And this is also, according to many people, this is proving this, another proof of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Now, what does this mean? This means that all of the presumptive propagandistic promotion of the idea of entropy as a fundamental, as the most fundamental universal law, which is the basis then for this whole idea of the Earth, of the world, of the universe as a running down system that began with a Big Bang. All of that is being challenged implicitly, if not explicitly, by the discovery of black holes, and the continued evidence, as some people say, is of Einstein's general theory of relativity. And you have to understand this. Excuse me. You have to understand this, that is a very profound development, because the entire array of entropy, it means that somehow this entire universe was created out of random processes that came out of an exploding Big Bang. But none of that explains how you get a curved space, because this whole its concept involves a non-curved space. How do you get curved space from a Big Bang? How do you get curved space from entropy? You don't. And what they generally say is that that all the development is going against entropy. It's using up things faster than they would normally use up. This is a very sick view, but it's the view in physics. It is the governing view of physics, and it spills over into biology, and it most of all spills over into climate science, right? Where they developed this model, the standard model, and which is completely disconnected from the relationship of the Earth to the Sun. I mean, to solar, to cosmic rays, and to the solar relationship to the ocean. It merely has a set of variables, and that set of variables is fixed, and then the only thing within that set of variables that's increasing is carbon dioxide. Therefore, that's the cause of warming, which is still not proven that it's actually warming. So this whole thing, but you can do this because the scientific world is still governed by the thuggery of the British Empire, which imposes this idea of entropy on the physics, the idea of natural selection and Darwin on biology, and this is the thuggery that creates the environment for then the corruption of a modern climate science, a British imperial climate science. So the other challenge to British imperial climate science is the fact that there is this proposal by Trump, which is being very fiercely opposed, to set up a climate review, to set up a panel to review climate and bring in everybody and have them all present everything so that you have an actual, discussion. You have an actual, and this is causing a total freak out as well, because it's having an open dialogue, an open discussion. So this is huge. This black hole photo that you can get on the internet. This is very big, and this is considered to be the center of all galaxies. And the black hole is kind of like what holds the galaxy together, but not because of some pairwise interaction of particles, because there are no particles in the black hole. They cease to exist as particles. We don't know what it is. We're not going to find out, because we're not going to go there. You're not going to go to a black hole. That would be kind of stupid. So anyhow, maybe we could at some point in the future. I don't know. So anyhow, so those are the two very profound developments that have occurred in the scientific realm. But it also opens it, because the more you go into space, the more you're going to discover the things that don't make sense under the governing view. The thuggery in science is so massive. And once you break that thuggery, then the rates of discovery, the rates of scientific development will accelerate, because people won't be afraid to hypothesize things that are not, that don't go with the consensus. They won't be afraid. They won't be so afraid to hypothesize things and to experiment and to see if those hypotheses have any validity. And then what happens is when you're onto something and you do some experiments and they don't like your experiments, then they attack your experiments. Like Spencemark did the experiments on the cloud formation by cosmic radiations, and they've suppressed the result from the CERN laboratory. They won't let it out. This is, it's thuggery. Academia, to a large extent, is thuggery. There's thuggery everywhere in this thing. And these people make their, money on the party line, So this is what's being challenged. Now, we are on the edge of a whole new world. We are on the edge of a new paradigm. People like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, they're living in a world and responding to a world that has no relationship to the world that they're living in. The Chinese are not trying to create a Chinese empire. They're not trying to create, a sphere of influence in the system of geopolitics. Russia is not trying to create a sphere of influence. They're not operating on geopolitics. There's a new principle that has emerged in the world, which Lyndon LaRouche has played a major role in promoting, but which the current president of China has adopted, which is a system of nations, big and small, collaborating in sovereignty over mutual beneficial policies. And that is coherence with the America First concept. It's not completely coherent, because you should say humanity first, but being humanity first and America first are not necessarily always at odds. And the discussion which is going on right now, and is continuing to go on, between China and the U.S. on a trade deal, it's not about trade. It's about how can the United States, which exists in one system, which unfortunately is a mess, and China, which is actually functioning in another system, how can they reach an agreement where both benefit? Where China doesn't have to give up its economic sovereignty to the international financial community, but where the U.S. actually is able to get out of the fact that it's deindustrialized and sent its manufacturing away, initially mainly to China and of course the southern Mexican border. So that is the issue of the trade deal. Now what Trump is saying is that once this trade deal is established, it's not the end. It's the first step in a greater collaborative relationship, which would probably also include Russia. Now, the problem that Trump has is that under George Bush Jr. and under Obama, that's 16 years of continuous British occupation of Washington, plus the remnants from previous periods, you have essentially an institutionalized policy that is institutionalized in the entirety of the Beltway. Among all the people in the Beltway, among all the policy wanks, all the people that were crawling up the ladder for the last 20 years, 30 years, to their high positions in government and where else. And when they go into government, they go into government, then they go into the private sector, and then they come back as cabinet members or whatever. These people are totally oriented towards a worldview that is run by us versus them geopolitics. And the entire orientation was, after the fall of communism and after the fall of the Soviet Union, that this will be the new world empire. And the orientation was to use the terrorists, to use everything to keep everyone from challenging the power that this represented. And that ultimately it would probably be required to win a nuclear war. And that's been the policy. So Donald Trump gets elected, and he's saying, well, maybe we should be friends with Russia and China. Yeah. Well, maybe, why do we need NATO? Yeah. Why did we spend, $7 trillion in this Iraq war? What did we get out of it? Yeah. I mean, we lied to go into Iraq in the first place. Weapons of mass destruction, that didn't happen. Yeah. Everybody's going berserk. Right? But this policy is still U.S. policy. That's the problem. It hasn't changed, even though Trump's been in 2.5 years. Almost 2.25 years. It hasn't changed. Because Trump has not been able to establish a different principle to govern our policy. If he was able to sit down with Putin and work out some kind of agreement on nuclear weapons or trade or Middle East or whatever, some kind of official agreement which is understood to represent a change of policy away from the previous policy of war, that would be a different thing. But he hasn't established that. He has not been able to establish that. That's what this entire assault on Trump has been, is to prevent him from being able to establish that. And that's what the Lords report of the British House of Lords says. We cannot survive, we may not survive, this special relationship with the U.S. may not survive a second term of Donald Trump. But we can survive a first term. That's what they mean. However, if Donald Trump establishes a relationship with China of the type I'm talking about, then that's the cornerstone for shifting the away from a war policy. Because ultimately, the aim of the war is not to stop Russia, it's to stop China. Because Russia is not the economic threat to the powers that be. It's China's development which is the threat. It's the Belt and Road which is the threat to them, not to us, not to me and you, but to this imperial elite, to this belief that we must dominate. And if we don't dominate, then someone's going to dominate us. So either we dominate or we're going to get dominated. And therefore, what difference does it make if the world goes into nuclear war? What difference does it make? It's we don't want to live in the world. We're not the dominant. But that's not what the Chinese or even the Russians are proposing. They're not proposing a world where anyone dominates anybody. They're proposing a world of mutual development. The new paradigm. The new paradigm that Lyndon LaRouche has been promoting all his life, and Helga LaRouche. And this will be presented at a memorial to LaRouche on the 8th of June. And get in touch with me to find out where we're holding the webcast of that memorial to Lyndon LaRouche. So this is the world. This is why we're on the verge of something very profound. And all these people that are going berserk right now, Pompeo, Bolton, and all these people, they're part of this old system. Their mindset is completely geared in this way. So we're coming to a point of determination on this soon.